A very disturbing creature has been sighted crawling around the Appalachian Mountains, and it might want to tear you apart. Welcome back to Unexplained Encounters. I'm your host, Darkness Prevails, and you can follow me on Twitter at DarkPrevails to check out our cool new Redwood Bureau tumblers. Today I've got an assortment of terrifying tales about nightmare creatures in the Appalachian Mountains and humanoid monsters haunting children. Enjoy, and don't forget, you can have your story narrated on this show. Just send me your creepy and believable stories of the unexplained at darkstories.org. Finally, go to eeriecast.com for more scary shows like this. Now, let's begin. Warning: the following story contains depictions of harm against animals. Appalachian creatures stalk my family. From Aggie. I'll start by stating the general area of where this all took place, and actually continues to take place. I, as well as generations of my family, were born and raised in West Virginia, right in the Appalachian Belt. My grandmother has about 7 acres on a mountain, where we all ran wild as kids. Now, as adults, we sit at night around a bonfire, enjoying the peaceful sounds. However, there comes a point in the night where the air grows heavy and sinister. Around these times, my grandmother's 2 large dogs even refuse to go off the porch to do their business. We don't know what lurks in the surrounding woods, but sometimes it makes itself known. When my 3 aunts, mother, and 3 uncles were younger, they did what all of us did as kids: roamed those woods. My grandmother's property has what we call a spring house, which is exactly how it sounds. It's a concrete block structure that has a peaceful and fresh spring that runs right through it. It was used before running water was put into the old farmhouse that sits atop the mountain, overlooking the entire property. At that point, the spring house had been worn down, and the woods began to overtake it, surrounding it so that it was buried deep. The weird thing about this spring house was that the only opening sat atop of it, so in order to even get into it, you would have to drop down from the top. As kids, you aren't really afraid of much except at night. It was apparently broad daylight when one of my aunts, we'll call her In, got the idea to do just that: drop in. When she dropped inside, all seemed fine. It was pitch dark, but she could feel and hear the water around her. She then began to hear soft breathing. She turned to one of the corners of the spring house. There, she saw an all-white humanoid creature staring at her. They were both stunned to see one another. This thing had sickly white skin, elongated limbs, and dark holes for facial features. All at once, fear pushed to the forefront, and she began to scream at my other aunt, B, to pull her back up. During the commotion, her glasses slid off her face and hit into the water below. She could feel the thing moving around now, and she screamed more. One of my uncles, K, yanked her out of the hole, where she began running towards the house. Her fear spurred the entire group, and they all followed after her. Eventually, she calmed down enough to tell them what she saw, and they never went back to the spring house again. I'm not sure if she told my grandmother, as my grandmother is quite religious, and even to this day she brushes off any paranormal experience we have at her place. Now, the story doesn't end there. In fact, it's just getting started. Years later, when my aunts and uncles were all grown up with children of their own, the spring house lured some of my cousins and sisters to it. They had heard of the white creature down there, but of course, they didn't believe my aunts. Kids being kids, they went through the woods until the spring house came into view. They planned to drop into it too. My cousin dropped down first. My sister lingered over the hole and stared down at her, not dropping in just yet. It took all of a few seconds before my cousin heard heavy breathing. Her fear immediately spiked, but she didn't say anything. Instead, she turned toward the sound. My aunt's long eroded glasses sat in the water beside the same all-white, elongated creature. This time it did not hesitate. It began to stretch out its limbs to move. She scrambled up and out with the help of my sister, and they too booked it back to the house. They told my aunt and mother what happened. They didn't deny the creature's existence, but instead consoled them as best they could, warning them to stay away from the place. When I eventually came into this world, I was always roaming my grandmother's property too. I rarely liked going to school, and instead I wanted to roam the woods and collect anything and everything I could find. I was often alone out there. Only my grandma's farm dog followed me about. However, the first time I saw the creature, it was during a family get-together. The adults were drinking by a bonfire when a few of my cousins and I decided to play a game called Cops and Robbers. Our version of it was basically hide and seek, but instead of one seeker, there was a group of them. And there was a group of hiders too. I was a hider this time around. I got the bright idea to hide behind an old Lincoln car parked by the barn, since I knew everyone else would be too scared to go out that far. After all, the light barely reached that far, only enough to see shadows. The car was also on the property line with my grandmother's neighbors, where a mobile home sat, unoccupied. The neighbor's house was a few feet away and was dark, as it was late. I sat down behind the car, closest to the trailer. A few minutes went by and I could faintly hear my cousins giggling and screaming gleefully. I shuffled to a squatting position, smiling to myself. Suddenly, I heard a whistle from behind me. I stiffened right away. My body seemed to know something wasn't right before my mind did. The whistle came softly again. It was almost too quiet to hear. A sound used to get someone's attention. I heard it all the time when my great-uncle would use it to call his dog. This time, though, it sounded slightly distorted. I gathered my courage, and I fully stood and began to turn towards the sound. Beside a tall tree near the trailer was this all-white creature. It was also squatting like I had been, but upon seeing me staring in fear, it straightened. The thing was nearly 7 feet tall, a sickly pale white color that shone even in the dark. Its limbs were long and grotesque, and before I knew it, I was running as fast as my legs could take me. I ended up colliding into one of my cousins, who I was very close with at the time, named Jay. She and I then slammed into the dirt. She yelped and was ready to rip me a new one, but she must have quickly seen the fear in my face, because instead, she asked what was wrong. I ended up telling her, and we agreed to quit the game entirely, and went into the house for the rest of the night. A few months later, though, the incident was nearly forgotten by us. Once again, the adults were partying, and we were playing the same game. I stayed well away from the barn at this point, and only hid near the house, staying in the light as much as possible. My cousin Jay didn't. She had a spurt of bravery or something. She went farther out than I'd previously gone, going directly behind the old barn. Behind the barn was nothing but woods for literal miles, and no light reaching that far. The moon was particularly bright, a full moon that summer night. She told me that's why she could slightly see out there. After a few moments, she grew bored and began to jog around the barn instead of just retracing her steps. That's when, out of the corner of her eye, she saw a man in a bright red sweater just sitting on an all-white lawn chair, staring into the woods. Now, we knew who all was there. This man did not look like any relative of ours, nor the nearby neighbors. The creepy thing was, he didn't even jump or move when she came by. She said it was like he was frozen. His skin was sickly white, like the creature's. It almost glowed. Obviously, she was afraid and ran back to the house calling my name. We met up, and she told me what happened. We never really said much to the grown-ups when they were drinking, as they seemed to have a habit of always laughing at whatever we told them, so we took it upon ourselves to investigate. Together, the two of us crept over towards the barn. We peeked around the corner to see the lawn chair empty. No one was around. As we turned to walk back, I heard my name whispered inside the dilapidated barn. Jay heard it too. Her eyes widened as she looked at my face. We both ran, tears in our eyes. That night, we slept with my poor grandma, smashed up against one another. The sound of that whisper still scares me to this very day. Just thinking about it sends shivers up my spine. Although the next night, we slept in the upstairs spare bedroom, as they call it, and to our horror, my grandma's dog kept looking into our deceased great-grandmother's room, growling softly. We shut the door with him inside the room with us until morning, as we didn't dare to step in front of her room to get to the stairs. The following day, after telling my Aunt B, she admitted the upstairs portion of the house always creeped her out. When I inquired why, she told me when she was a little girl, she'd watched a cheesy, scary movie about werewolves. But in her young mind, it was very creepy. Afterwards, her and my grandmother slept in the third bedroom at the end of the hall. She was having trouble sleeping that night due to the movie replaying in her mind. She dozed off and on, but at one point, she began to hear heavy breathing. The room was suddenly hot and moist as well. Her eyes shot open, and she saw a werewolf-like creature sitting at the bottom of her bed, eyes right on her. It stayed like this until morning. Now, obviously, this isn't the same creature we'd all been seeing, but I know skinwalkers can mimic voices and other things, which can scare you. And that night it had been werewolves for her, so maybe this entity or another was similar, and wants to mimic your fears. Anyway, after she told me this, I stopped going upstairs for a long time. Whenever I stayed with my grandmother during the summer, I slept downstairs in the living room on her couch. I was always frightened there at night. I constantly left the TV playing to drown out any noises, as my grandma liked to sleep with her doors and windows wide open. On a few occasions, I was awakened by the shadow of a person stepping in front of the TV to stare. Then it would proceed into the kitchen. This always horrified me, but I would convince myself I was dreaming. However, it always happened at 3 a.m. on the dot, multiple nights a week. Sometimes I swear the kitchen light would switch on, and the faucet in there would turn on, water exploding loudly onto the ceramic. My grandma, who had her bed in the living room as well, due to having arthritic knees and not being able to climb the stairs nightly, never heard any of this. However, her dog, who often slept on my legs, would sit up, ears perked towards the kitchen. Now, this was happening after my great-grandmother had passed, and she was an odd creature herself. When she was alive at 3 a.m. every night, she would go into the kitchen, turn the lights on, and just sit there for hours playing cards on the wooden dining room table. When I asked her why a few times, she always told me, "I can talk to my husband." Her husband had died a long time ago, but as a young kid, I thought this was all very weird. My great-grandmother and I never got along, so if it was her doing this at night, I still didn't feel too safe. I even had a dream about her after the kitchen light flicked on and I dozed off, because I was used to it by this point. In the dream, the stairway light was on, and she began to descend the steps. I was shocked to see her, because even in the dream I knew she'd died. I walked over to the steps. The rest of the house was dark besides the one light. She looked like her usual self, in her normal all-white attire. However, when I looked up at her and smiled, she frowned deeply. I sensed something was wrong then, like it wasn't her. She spoke in a deep, harsh tone, unlike her usual voice. "Hello." I was scared now, every hair on my body standing up. I tried to wake myself up, knowing it was a dream. "What are you doing here?" I stammered, stepping back. Whatever the thing was that mimicked her smiled cruelly. "I came to tell you something important. You're all going to hell. This is hell. All the demons are here." After the words were out, I was suddenly awake, gasping for air. I kept replaying her or its words all night, unable to sleep. My mind decided all meant my family and I was distraught for days, wanting to go home to get away from that house. So I did. I didn't frequent it much in my teenage years either. I got a job at 15 to help out with the bills, and eventually I moved to a city about 20 minutes away when I turned 18. I don't visit there often, as my family and I are not on the best terms anymore. But one of my aunts has moved in recently to help out my grandmother as she ages. She's told me about how the dogs don't go out at night anymore, how sometimes she hears an odd screech and all the crickets go silent, how one night she heard something scream her name from the woods. She even told me about how the neighbor, who's lived there nearly as long as our family has, called my grandma to tell her he heard such an odd scream from the woods too. He immediately got back on his tractor and drove it into the garage, locking the doors tight. This has never happened before, and to hear how frightened a man who has lived there his entire life was, I was a bit shaken up. When I did find time to sneak up there without a ton of family members being there, my aunt and I found a baby raccoon who had been killed in an odd way. Usually, coyotes kill and eat them, and there aren't any other predators in the area. But the thing about this was, it was whole. It looked like whoever killed it had twisted it, forcing its legs to face the wrong way. There were no other indicators of how it died. All of its legs were seemingly unbroken, even. A few days after this, my aunt called to tell me she found multiple twisted animals, all like that, all placed along the tree line. To this day, my family and I exchange these scary stories. We rarely, if ever, go near those woods at night. If I decide to take my dogs on a small hike, I stay fairly close to the tree line when we're in the woods, even during the day. We have so many stories about the odd happenings there, like mysterious lights hovering near us, screams from the woods, odd lights in the sky, a lot of weird things. The house and land are so beautiful, but something old and haunting lurks around it, stalking generations of my family, and I'm not sure if it will ever leave us alone. Dravaka, from Panther in the Darkness. As a child, you often believe in fairy tales, witches, or dragons. It never occurred to me that I would have the chance to actually meet something otherworldly or fairy-like, but this would turn out to be a nightmare for me. When I was 7 years old, I came to live with my father due to my mother not protecting me from her female partner and now wife, and due to some neglect on my mother's part. My father and I, when I turned 8, started to live on a 4-acre plot of land owned by my grandmother. Both of us lived in trailers at the time, but my grandmother was planning on building a brick house. What came with the new place to live was, of course, a new school. I made friends rather quickly. Well, one day while playing soccer with my new friends, I kicked the ball into the forest by the school. I told my friends I would go get it, but I knew I couldn't go too deep, or I'd be in trouble with the teachers. Luckily, I didn't kick it too far in, but as I found and picked up the ball, I noticed a rather blue foot. At first, I thought I'd found a body, but no, that was far from the truth. As I kept looking, I soon followed up the foot to the ankle, to a pair of jeans, then up more to another foot, ankle, and jeans once more, then up to a stomach that showed abs and a chest, which were a shimmery blue. The sun had given it a shimmery hue like that of a snake or fish. As odd as that was, he wore a black leather vest, making his chest bare. I stopped at his face. His smile was in a wide grin. His teeth were that of a canine, only imagine them on a humanoid being. His lips were a light gray and thin, but still plump somehow. His nose, what I would call a Roman nose, his eyes amber with other colors mixed in, and his hair was deep navy with the same shimmery coloration as his skin. He simply put his finger to his lips. "Hush, I won't hurt you." I didn't believe him. Something deep down told me not to trust him. As I backed away, his smiling expression turned to one of a cold blank stare, but he then smirked at me, as if to tell me this wasn't the last time I would see him. Weeks turned to months, until one summer day I was jumping on my trampoline. I could smell the honeysuckles growing on the trees on the edge of my grandma's property. So of course, I jumped off to go get some. Only something stopped me, and that was blue feet, which I saw at the edge where the barbed wire lined the property. I backed up, and I peeked to see it was him. He smiled at me like before. "Come here, little one. Do you want to play in the forest?" he asked while stepping towards me. But I ran. Night after night, I would have nightmares of me walking on my grandma's front lawn and him chasing me and catching me. Each time I woke up, my feet would be dirty. Why was this bad? Because as a child, I sleepwalked until I was 9, almost until I was 10. I did see him one last time. I was standing a few feet away, staring into the forest, contemplating going into the woods, even though my dad told me never to do so, as I told him about the being who tormented me. It wasn't long before he showed himself to me again. "Running away again, little one?" he asked. "No, but what are you? Do you have a name?" I inquired. He grinned at me. "Nothing you could understand, but Dravaka, child." "What does Dravaka mean?" I asked. He laughed as he left me there, and that was the last I've seen of this being. I don't know what he was, but I know if it was possible, he would have harmed me. However, I wonder if it was a figment of my child's imagination, or if it was all real. What did we see? From Lay Bay. One evening, my brother and I went for a walk around the perimeter of our land, and for some reason, I began to feel weird, like I was in a dream as the sound of leaves rustling waved through the forest around us. The shadows of the trees had grown darker as the sun was setting. Thankfully, my brother had brought a flashlight along with him. We reached the back side of our property when we began to hear twigs and leaves crunching from the woods in front of us. I was starting to see a lot of colors by then. All the trees were lit up with green, orange, and purple hues. I'm not sure what my brother was seeing. I told him I wanted to start back towards the house. I didn't tell him that I was getting creeped out. We soon made it to the old cemetery. Now, when we bought the land 2 years ago, I hated that the cemetery was located just behind our property. I grabbed my brother's flashlight and pointed the light at the sound. We looked closer. Soon, within the light, we made out more features of a humanoid shape. We were not alone out there. Whatever it was we were looking at, was tall, skinny, and pale. It appeared to be hunched over, with long arms. The light of the flashlight reflected off of wide and glowing eyes. As we stood there, staring at it, I tried to make sense of what we were seeing. Maybe it was only a deer. We began to walk down the driveway again, but we didn't take our eyes off of that thing. As we took a few steps, it moved with us. I almost had a dang heart attack. It was then I remembered we were on holy ground, or it was meant to be, and that thing was on the other side. It couldn't get to us as long as we kept within our property line. We never took our eyes off the thing as we walked away. The creature matched our pace, following us along in the woods to the left of us. We shouted for it to leave us alone. We walked towards the end of our driveway. We pretended like nothing had happened, because we could have just been seeing other shadows or animals. The security light at the gate flicked on, and suddenly every single one of the dogs that lived down the hill from us began to howl altogether. Our dogs were howling from their crates too. Their howls were so loud it gave us chills. For as long as we've lived there, we never had something happen like this. Why were the dogs barking like they were some kind of alarm, sensing an intruder? I started to hear whispers in the soft breeze of the night. I got chills thinking about the cemetery a yard away. I started to feel like I was going to be sick. I felt like I was wigging out. After I calmed down, my brother and I decided we weren't going to be scared of that thing. My brother had texted one of our friends to come over and hang out with us. We assumed there was safety in numbers. So we went back out of the house to meet him in the driveway. When we made it to the driveway, I grabbed his arm and yanked him back before he saw the danger. A large black snake hissed along menacingly past us. The snake began heading towards the woodline in the same direction and place where we had seen that figure. We then walked to the mailbox to meet my friend. When we met up with him, we told him what happened. He was totally spooked. We stood there at the gate together, talking. I lit up a few cigarettes. Then our friend said he started to feel the night and how it was off. Something was up. We could feel something watching us. That's when we all decided to walk towards the tree line. I showed him where we saw the thing. Then we started to hear an owl calling from the forest. Our friend kept talking like nothing was going on. But I couldn't stay focused. I felt as if I was having an out-of-body experience as we stood there. I then saw the shadow of that thing circling us. I could feel it moving around us. I saw shadows in the tree line. That's when we looked towards the cemetery. All of us then saw something that looked like the glow of a lantern in the distance. As we began to talk, the creatures in the woods seemed to get louder and louder. The crickets chirped, the owl began to coo again, and branches snapped from within the woods. Then we began to hear the howls of the dogs in the neighborhood. It all seemed to be happening at once. The moon was full in the sky. Then everything grew quiet again. We decided to call it a night after that. It was getting late. Now, I feel as though some may laugh at the story, but we know what we experienced, believe us or not. At night around here, weird things have happened, but never like this. Thanks for listening to Unexplained Encounters. If you enjoyed the show, you can support us in a number of other ways. You can go to eeriecast.store to buy some creepy t-shirts or coffee mugs. Go to eeriecast.com to listen to and follow this show and our other scary podcasts on your favorite podcasting app, or follow me on Twitter @DarkPrevails for more screams and memes. Before I go, be sure to send me your scariest stories of the unexplained at darkstories.org. Until next time, stay safe out there and stay creepy, because this world is a strange one.